In the final days of his life, Jesus gathers his disciples on a quiet hillside, weaving a story about a humble carpenter whose legacy of love and sacrifice echoes through time. As the shadow of the cross looms over them, each disciple must confront their deepest fears, doubts, and hopes, discovering that the path of faith is forged not by strength alone but by a love that transcends lifetimes. Will they find the courage to carry forward his message, or will the weight of his impending sacrifice break them? Join them on this powerful journey of redemption and resilience, where every whispered lesson and tear shed builds a legacy that will change the world forever. The disciples sat in a loose circle around Jesus, the remnants of a day's journey resting heavily on their shoulders. They felt the quiet weight of the evening settle around them, though each sensed that something far deeper was taking root in the silence. They were weary yet attentive, drawn to the calm intensity in Jesus' gaze, which seemed to reflect both a timeless love and an understanding that their time together was slipping away. Each of the 12 disciples had followed him through countless towns, fields, and valleys, yet tonight felt different. Peter, with his fiery spirit, found himself unusually subdued. John's introspective nature led him to sit closer, his eyes fixed on Jesus as if he might somehow hold on to him a little longer. Thomas, the ever-questioning heart of their group, wrestled with an unease he couldn't quite name, as if his own doubts were heavier tonight than usual. In this closeness, their anxieties were magnified, and a familiar fear lingered. What would they do if he left them? Sensing their troubled hearts, Jesus allowed the silence to thicken, drawing them closer until finally he began to speak, his voice soft but with a resonance that reached each of them. "Let me tell you a story," he said, and though his words were simple, there was a solemnity to them that captured every ear. As Jesus spoke of a humble carpenter, their imaginations carried them to the life of this unknown man who had labored with dedication, building something not just for himself but for those he loved. It was clear that this story was more than a simple tale. There was a timelessness, a depth that hinted at something much larger. Each disciple felt a quiet stirring, a sense that they were part of a story that would extend far beyond their lives. Together they listened, leaning into every word, sensing that Jesus was speaking to their very souls. In his story, Jesus painted the life of a carpenter so vividly that each disciple could almost see the man's roughened hands, feel the weight of his work. The carpenter, an ordinary man in the world's eyes, was devoted to building a home that would stand as a testament to his life's purpose. The carpenter worked tirelessly, his life revolving around the simple, steady rhythm of shaping wood, each stroke and cut an act of love. But it wasn't just for himself. He labored for those he loved, his family, his children, and for those who would come long after him. Jesus spoke of how the carpenter poured his very soul into the structure, each beam and joint a piece of his heart, all the while aware that he wouldn't see its full legacy. Day after day, the carpenter's shadow followed him, a quiet reminder that he was but one man, that his strength would eventually fade. Yet he accepted this truth with a steady calm, embracing his own limitations and even seeing beauty in them. Jesus' voice softened, and the disciples sensed that his words were as much a promise as a warning. He built even as he grew weaker, Jesus said, and each disciple felt a twinge of recognition. They, too, had sacrificed, had labored in the hope of building something greater than themselves, yet they knew they would not see its completion. The disciples sat in reflective silence, realizing that they were bound to this carpenter's legacy, that they were building something just as enduring, a legacy that would shelter others in the way they hoped to be sheltered by Jesus' love. Each of them felt the truth of Jesus' story sink deep, the quiet wisdom of the carpenter's sacrifice igniting in them a sense of responsibility they hadn't fully understood until now. After Jesus paused, leaving them to reflect on the story's meaning, the disciples turned to each other, sharing their own vulnerabilities, revealing their hidden fears, and allowing the shadows they carried within them to come into the light. Peter spoke first, his usually bold voice softened by the weight of his confession. He admitted that he was terrified of failing, of letting down the one he had pledged to follow. For all his boldness, Peter carried an inner burden of doubt, a gnawing fear that he might not be able to stand by Jesus when it mattered most. His honesty struck a chord, and the others nodded in understanding. John, often lost in thought, admitted that he sometimes wondered if he was strong enough, if he was truly capable of carrying forward all that Jesus was teaching them. He voiced a quiet longing to be more, to somehow live up to the greatness he saw in Jesus. Thomas, with his characteristic candor, shared his doubts openly, his voice laced with both humility and frustration. Doubts, he explained, seemed to follow him like a shadow he couldn't shake. He longed for a faith as unwavering as the others, yet something within him always held back, a small voice of skepticism that wouldn't be silenced. Jesus listened, his eyes filled with understanding. He spoke of shadows not as weaknesses but as reminders of their humanity, as parts of themselves they could learn from rather than fear. "The shadow of my cross will stretch over you," he said, his words gentle yet filled with profound wisdom. "It is not a mark of sorrow but a guide, a constant reminder that faith is found in the struggle, in the courage to carry on." As they absorbed his words, the disciples felt a new sense of courage rise within them, a strength born of vulnerability and trust. They realized that the path ahead would not be easy, but they would not walk it alone. The shadow of the cross would be a source of strength, guiding them even when they stumbled. Mary Magdalene joined the disciples and began to speak, her voice steady but tinged with memories that carried both pain and redemption. She shared the story of her life before meeting Jesus, the shame and loneliness that had followed her for so long. She described the isolation, the way she had carried her burdens in silence, her heart scarred by the judgment and scorn of others. Yet when she spoke of her encounter with Jesus, her voice softened, and a light seemed to fill her eyes. She told them how Jesus had looked at her with a love that saw beyond her faults, beyond her past, to the person she truly was beneath the layers of guilt and fear. He had lifted the weight from her shoulders, had healed wounds she had thought would never close. "In his love I found freedom," she said, her words resonating with a power that moved each disciple. As Mary's story unfolded, the disciples felt themselves drawn into her experience, each of them sensing that they too carried their own burdens of guilt, self-doubt, and regret. Her words reminded them that Jesus' message was not just about sacrifice but about redemption, about a love so profound it could heal even the most broken souls. Mary's story gave them a new understanding of the legacy of the cross. It was not only a symbol of suffering but of boundless love and hope. They felt a shared gratitude, a deepened commitment to the mission Jesus had given them, for they now saw it as a continuation of that love, an invitation to be instruments of healing for others. In the early dawn, John experienced a vision that felt as real as the ground beneath him. In this vision he saw a future shaped by the cross, a world transformed by the legacy Jesus was leaving them. John's heart swelled with a mixture of awe and sorrow as he saw both the beauty and the suffering that lay ahead. He saw countless lives touched by the cross, people finding hope and purpose through its shadow. But he also saw the pain, the sacrifices, the battles to come. It was a vision filled with both light and darkness, joy and struggle, each woven together in a way that both inspired and humbled him. Trembling, John shared his vision with Jesus, his voice filled with a reverence he had never felt before. Jesus listened, and as he placed a gentle hand on John's shoulder, he spoke words that would stay with him forever. "Each of you is a stone in the foundation of something greater," Jesus said. John's heart felt heavy yet full of purpose, and he realized that he was not alone in carrying this mission. His vision was not only a glimpse of the future but a reminder of the strength he and his fellow disciples would need to build it. He understood now that his role was part of a greater design, that even his smallest actions would echo through the ages, leaving a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. As they continued their journey together, Jesus spoke of the trials that would come, his words filled with both love and solemnity. The disciples listened, each of them feeling the weight of his warning in a deeply personal way. Peter's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening with every word. He was determined to remain loyal no matter what lay ahead. In his mind, he vowed never to let fear sway him, to stand firm even if the whole world turned against them. Yet beneath his courage, a flicker of doubt lingered, a fear he kept hidden from the others. Thomas, meanwhile, felt his heart twist with a familiar uncertainty, wondering if he would truly be strong enough to face the unknown. He wrestled with his doubts, feeling them rise within him like a storm, challenging his faith. Jesus sensed each of their struggles, and he spoke to each one, offering words of comfort and encouragement, like a balm to their wounded hearts. His reassurance reminded them that, while the path ahead would be painful, they would not be alone. In that moment, the disciples felt their fears soften, replaced by a quiet strength that settled within them like a steady flame. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Peter shared a memory from his childhood that he rarely spoke of. He described his father, a fisherman who had risked his life for his family during a terrible storm. As Peter spoke, his voice softened with reverence and pride, his words painting a picture of a man who had faced danger with a courage that bordered on selflessness. His father had always been a figure of strength, yet Peter remembered a night when he had seen the exhaustion etched in his father's face, the silent struggle behind his unwavering resolve. Jesus listened, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. He gently reminded Peter that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act in spite of it. Peter felt a shift within himself, as if he were seeing both his father and himself through a new lens. He realized that his father's story was a mirror of the legacy Jesus was asking him to carry forward. A legacy built not on fearlessness but on love. In that moment, Peter felt a renewed determination, a deeper sense of responsibility. He knew that his journey, like his father's, would be fraught with challenges, yet he felt ready, strengthened by the memory of his father's sacrifice. Elsewhere, the carpenter's daughter carried her father's legacy forward in ways that she could scarcely understand. She remembered her father's hands, rough and calloused from years of work, and the quiet wisdom he had passed down to her in the simplest of moments. His love had been a constant presence, a quiet strength that had shaped her, and as she grew older she found herself echoing his words to her own children, passing on his teachings like precious heirlooms. When tragedy struck her own family, she found herself drawing strength from her father's example, remembering the way he had labored with love, his quiet resilience a guiding light through her darkest days. Though she would never know of the disciples or the legacy they were building, her life too was a testament to the power of sacrifice and love. In her own way, she was a continuation of the carpenter's legacy, her story intertwining with theirs in a way that transcended time. As Jesus prayed, his thoughts drifted to each of his disciples, and he felt the depth of his love for them weigh upon his heart. He knew the cross awaited him, knew the suffering and sacrifice that would be required, yet in this moment, his thoughts were not of himself but of them, all of the futures they would carry, the burdens they would bear in his name. In the silence, his prayers grew heavier, each one a plea for their protection, their courage, their strength. The disciples, meanwhile, struggled to stay awake, their own inner conflicts filling the quiet moments with whispered fears. In the dark, they glimpsed Jesus' unwavering dedication, his love so palpable it was almost a tangible presence. They realized that his mission, his love, was something they could only begin to understand, yet in that moment, they felt a quiet conviction settle within them. His love was a flame that would guide them, a strength that would carry them through even the darkest of nights. After Jesus' crucifixion, the disciples gathered in sorrow, each of them grappling with the enormity of their loss. Their hearts were shattered, yet amid the pain, they felt a quiet stirring, a memory of his words that lingered in the silence. They spoke in hushed tones, remembering his story of the carpenter, the quiet legacy of love and sacrifice that had shaped their lives. Together, they realized that the shadow of the cross was now their own, a burden and a blessing they would carry forward. Though they felt broken, they knew that their mission was only beginning, that they were now the stewards of his legacy. They parted ways with a renewed sense of purpose, each of them determined to honor his memory by living the love he had taught them, the shadow of the cross guiding their every step. And so, the legacy of the cross was born, a light that would guide countless souls, an eternal promise of love and hope that would endure through the ages. Years later, the disciples' lives had touched countless others, each of them a link in the chain of a legacy that extended beyond what they could see. Though they had faced trials, they had remained true to the mission, each step an echo of the love Jesus had shown them. As they looked back, they saw the cross not only as a symbol of sacrifice but as a beacon of light, its shadow stretching over the generations to come. Their story was woven into the fabric of history, a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and the promise of a love that would last forever. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.